This is going to be a bit of a love letter to the Payload game mode, which I personally believe to be the best game mode, not just in Team Fortress 2, but in most games it appears in. I know this is going to be a controversial video, alright, I know there will be riots in the streets, and people will be burning down houses and churches, because I'm not talking about other people's favorite game mode, and that's okay. Well, I mean, maybe not the riots in the streets, so let's keep those to a minimum, but I mean, it's okay to have differing opinions. And what I hope to do with this video is explain why I personally like playing the game mode, and lay out my argument as to why it's just a great game mode in general. So first, let's go over what the heck Payload even is for someone who for some reason has only been playing CTF or just doesn't know what Payload is, which why did you click on this video? But anyway, the Payload game mode is a game mode that shows up in many multiplayer shooters, most notably the hero shooter subgenre, and in it there is a payload to be pushed, who would have guessed, usually by simply being in close proximity. It typically comes in two different flavors, one that I will call Classic Payload and another that I will call Payload Race. In Classic Payload, there is an attacking team that is pushing the payload and a defending team trying to stop them from reaching the end. In Payload Race, there are two carts and both teams are attacking and defending simultaneously and trying to push their cart to the end first. This video will primarily focus on Classic Payload, but I will mention Payload Race near the end because it also does come up quite a bit. And that's out of the way, let's talk about why Payload is great. Part 1. Attack/defense balance. Okay, so a core concept you need to understand about game mode balance and design philosophy is the concept that defending is easier than attacking. This is true because the defending team has the positional advantage. Basic stuff, you already knew this. If everyone plays like a bunch of dumb monkeys, then this advantage becomes very, very clear. There is an exception here for movement shooters, but we're just not talking about that. Alright, just a quick blurb about defending being easier than attacking. In almost every game mode with an attacking team and a defending team, there is a time limit. To put it bluntly, the attacking team's goal is to attack and the defending team's goal is to waste time. What this means is that a long stalemate is really just the defending team doing a thing called winning. Alright, back to the video now. So clearly, to make a game mode fair, you need to balance it around this law of the universe, and there really is a lot of ways to do this, some good and some bad. An example of a good way to balance a game mode around this is bomb defusal. A pretty prominent game mode right now in the tactical shooter subgenre. In it, there are 2 bomb sites, but the attacking team only has to plant the bomb on one, so the defending team has to split up and allocate some players to each bomb site. So while they do have the positional advantage, they don't know where the attacking team is coming from, and will likely also be outnumbered unless they're stacking a site for some reason, definitely wall hacks. Anyway, to add more depth, if a site is taken and the bomb is planted, in a pleasing symmetry, it is now the defending team's turn to attack while the attacking team has the better position and is probably outnumbered. Obviously, this only works in a tactical shooter setting, but it does go to show you just how brilliantly this game mode is crafted. Now let's look at a very different approach that shows up in a lot of game modes. Just not having a designated attacking or defending team? This kind of skirts around this core design concept, and although it does technically ensure absolute fairness, I'll be completely honest, I don't like it. Game modes like Capture the Flag and Team Deathmatch historically have had an issue with camping as an obnoxious strategy that actually works, especially if you switch up your camping spot every now and again. As it turns out, if you don't give people an incentive to attack other than it just being more fun, there will be people who don't attack. But how about when there is an objective, like 5 CP? Stalemates. Playing 5 CP is the fucking worst because unless there's a clear, stronger team, the game just devolves into this lengthy stalemate. And then the game starts to drag on and on and on, and it just isn't fun. Like, Highlander 5 CP stalemates are just the worst to watch.
Getting kind of bored.
And remember, the team that is on the attack and the team that is on defense are still going to be flip-flopping. You need to be able to take advantage of an opening or cover up a weakness or some shit, which makes the bar for viability in 5CP revolve around versatility, which for a hero shooter is not a good thing. This is something I know people will fight tooth and nail on, and not without good reason. A good counter-argument is that it's more enjoyable to have a more dynamic and shifting game mode with ever-changing circumstances. Now, this is a good point, this is a great point, but what I'm arguing is that it's more valuable to give a strong incentive to push instead of just waiting for an opening or a slight advantage during a boring stalemate. and to not limit playstyles. Now in a 12v12 hyper-casual environment, really anything works, but you're still at risk of being left in the dust. Like playing Engineer full-time on 5CP, as soon as you set up, it feels like something will change or some shit happens. It just
ain't doing it right.
Maybe if the game mode was tweaked or perfected, I would like it more, but as it stands, I hate 5CP. And this isn't even mentioning the pacing of the games in all of these types of game modes, which I already talked about here in this video. Really, I just find it better to have a game mode with a designated attacking team and defending team because they encourage more diverse team composition and playstyles, something that, again, is important in a hero shooter like Team Fortress 2. They're also typically better paced, and they encourage more map variety, where if you have something like a 3-stage payload or attack defense map with up to 7 points, you can have some really interesting points in there, as opposed to something like King of the Hill, which by design can only have 1, and should in a fair world be absolutely symmetrical. I know a lot of people will like that, and to be honest I still do too, but I find that it provides less player interest and gives maps less freedom to have more unique map design. That is not to say you can't have great King of the Hill maps, and Koth in general is a bit of an anomaly. It's another one of those game modes you see popping up time after time, and it is good, especially with that ever-present respawn trick in TF2 where the team holding the point has a longer respawn. This helps the now attacking team become an attacking team, so they can coordinate a push, and if it succeeds, the game flip-flops. You have to realize here that TF2 is an exception and not the norm. Oftentimes, King of the Hill turns into glorified team deathmatch with an incentive to attack. This is even in TF2. So it's better than TDM, but that's a pretty low bar. Generally speaking, I think it's better to have an attacking team and defending team to avoid stalemates, and to encourage actual gameplay. But there are other game modes that can do that for you, like Attack Defend, or Invasion, or whatever. And now it's time to talk about the second reason Payload is great. Part 2. Dynamic objectives and incremental progress. The biggest difference between payload and attack defense is unsurprisingly that there is a payload in payload. This creates what I like to call a dynamic objective. Now, dynamic objectives are something we are all familiar with. Most sports with balls have dynamic objectives, and video games or game modes that adopt balls and goals or nets or whatever are examples of this. What sets Payload apart from those is that instead of a light ball that can go anywhere, it's a heavy payload that stays on a set track. This gives it more of a feeling of a dynamic control point rather than a super spontaneous energized focal point for each team with an unpredictable ever-changing position and direction. An integral part of attack defend or invasion is the static control point that the attacking team is trying to attack. By design, this forces the defending team to watch all the flank routes to the point, and everything about the point, and everything else about the point. In Payload, because the objective isn't static and you're watching the payload, the focus of defense and offense changes based on progress and offers more interesting and lively gameplay with ever-changing circumstances while keeping the teams as being defending and attacking. Attack Defend changes based off progress too, but in a very different way. In Attack Defend, the balance of attacking being harder than defending is balanced by the attacking team only needing one successful push to capture a point, or constant trades and relying on the respawn time advantage.
This point is mine!
In attack defense, you are taking points. In payload, you are taking ground. This is where the concept of incremental progress comes into play. It creates more opportunities for the defense to defend at different parts of the map. In games where the payload starts rolling back after a set period of time, there's usually checkpoints for the attacking team, which also serves as areas where spawn points can change as the map progresses further. I really can't stress enough just how genius the payload game mode is for this system of incremental growth. Like, look at the first point of Upward, how Blue is trying to take ground instead of just chokes and control points. Look how, because the payload has incremental growth instead of just a static control point where the first point is, there's this back and forth for the positional advantage over the course of the area between Blue spawn and first point. If this was Attack Defend, this sort of map would not be possible because Attack Defend relies on these absolute fucking units of defense that are extremely hard to break into. Dynamic objective, incremental growth.
It's very simple.
Part 2.5. Maps? Okay, this is the part of the video where we officially acknowledge map design exists. And map design makes judging similar game modes like Attack Defend and Payload sort of difficult, because if you really wanted to, you could hypothetically make a payload map that feels just like an Attack Defend map. Like the middle of Swiftwater gives me heavy Mountain Lab Blast vibes. And it's also important to note that Attack Defend maps can change how long it takes to cap a point. So you're still not taking ground, but you can make it less of a quick one-time take. which does mean me saying that the attacking team only needing one successful push was sort of a lie, because in theory the defending team could counterattack and slap them back, but in practice, almost always once a point is captured, a point is capped. But it does really ensure you really have to cap the point, so, you know.
I cannot believe this!
See, judging game modes feels a bit like judging tools for art instead of art itself, because you can do a whole lot with every game mode ever in any game. For example, although it's true Attack Defend will never be able to have a map centered around taking ground the same way Payload does, that doesn't mean you can't make a more open map and have the fights about securing the area just before or around the actual position of the point. So despite the fact that Attack Defend relies on every point being really hard to get onto, you can change how that feels a lot. Like I said, you can do a lot with the tools at your disposal. Who would have guessed that different maps can feel very different even if they're the same game mode? Another thing about map design is that the maps of a certain game mode are what we think of when we think of game modes, and they show off what game modes are capable of. Some of my favorite maps in TF2 are Steel and Gravel Pit. Yes, Gravel Pit. And if there were more maps like that showing off what Attack Defend could do, maybe I would favor it more over the incremental progress and dynamic objectives of Payload. It's just really hard to say, but the fact is that almost all linear Attack Defend maps you could see as being Payload maps, while there are many Payload maps like Upward, Pierre, Thunder Mountain, and a lot more that just would not translate over to Attack Defend at all. Maps make the game mode, no doubt, and fortunately Payload has a lot of great maps, enough to show off all it has. So yeah, that was just a bit of a 2.5 just to tack on to the end of the dynamic objective and incremental growth part. Part 3, Complex Simplicity. A major hurdle every game mode has to overcome is actually getting people to play the fucking game mode and not having it devolve into this TDM fest. Now, admittedly, Payload doesn't actually force players onto the cart, no matter how much the TF2 mercenaries talk about it.
You will push this cart, or I will push you into a grave!
Keep that cart moving!
When'd you mongrels learn to push? Get on my nuts!
But it does have incentives beyond just trying to win the game. In TF2, there's a cool mechanic where the payload gives health and ammo, kind of like a dispenser. This makes pushing a little easier, but its main goal is to be an incentive to get near the damn thing. Getting near a payload is also a relatively simple concept, yet this simple objective, push the payload, has so many complex implications in decision making for both teams, combining tactics with shooting, something that every game mode should aspire to do. Alright, so I've talked a lot about why I like the game mode, but that doesn't mean it's perfect, and it's time to acknowledge some of the shortcomings. One of the major ones being, fine, I just won't talk about it then, how's that?
I love the smell of hot tar in the morning. Yeah, baby!
Part 4, Steamrolls. Steamrolls are scientifically defined in multiplayer games as being that one time when one team absolutely fucking obliterates the opposing team. And listen, you're never going to be completely rid of these in any game mode. Even in matchmaking that's based off your skill and all that, it's gonna happen sometimes. And there are prevention methods like scrambling or letting players freely switch sides on their own. Both of these obviously aren't ideal for a more competitive setting, but for those there's usually a surrender option to just skip the fight altogether. So Steamrolls, they happen. But Payload, as I'm sure you know, doesn't exactly help the problem. In fact, it makes it worse. In TF2, the cart's infinite ammo and health makes recovering from a push a lot easier. Oftentimes in Payload, the cart can feel like a boulder that's near the edge of a cliff. Once it gets rolling, you can't really stop it. This is by far the biggest criticism I have for Payload. It almost encourages fast rolls. Like seriously, rarely do you see every point in Payload being defended how it should. In balanced games, at least a couple go by pretty quick based off past momentum. This is even more true with experienced players not letting the defense get a foot in, but if they do get a foot in, the last part of any Payload map in any game is meant to be the last stand of the defending team, and thus is generally very fortified. This can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your viewpoint. I'm personally pretty indifferent, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. So there you go. Part 5, Payload Race. In TF2, Payload Race has the same gameplay as Capture the Flag. You have something to attack and something to defend. In some different games, or when both teams actually want to win, you'll see the teams allocate some of their team to pushing the cart and stopping the enemy. It's not bad, it's Capture the Flag. You know what Capture the Flag is, it feels like that. Part 6. Maybe these title cards are getting a bit much. Maybe I should stop this, Okay, anyway, this is the end of the video, so that's nice. In short, having an attacking and defending team is good for these reasons. Payload balances attack/defense in these ways, which are good for these reasons. Some quick notes before the video ends. If I could change anything in payload, specifically in TF2, I would remove the cart's infinite ammo. It wouldn't fix the steamroll issue, there really isn't any way to do that, but the way I see it, you only really need more ammo if you're already on a roll expending lots of ammo. There are also strategies like cart heavy, which don't require any positioning on the heavy's part to be relatively effective. And then there are cart pyros and engineers with a short circuit, and the payload becomes too much of this fucking unit that it just really shouldn't be. And I think the health dispenser is more than enough incentive for pub players to get on that damn cart.
Yes!
I've seen some people say that the short circuit should just not take ammo from the payload cart, but really I don't see a reason why any class should be able to take ammo from the payload cart. It just really isn't necessary. Another thing is I really like how the payload is a prop in the game world, so you have this move and cover that both teams can use. It makes gameplay a bit more dynamic, and the more witty of players can use it to their advantage sometimes, which is always a good thing. So I like the idea of a physical payload cart, even if it does encourage some cheeky spies to try and cap last sometimes. You little fucking buggers, get out of there, dude. And lastly, I just wanted to say that it's actually a pretty close match between payload and King of the Hill for me. Although I wouldn't remove attack defend for the world, as I think variety is the key to enjoying a game in the long run, I do think that payload makes for a better game mode and gives maps more freedom. King of the Hill, on the other hand, is a completely different beast, entirely with wildly different gameplay than either payload or attack defend. It's no question better than 5CP, especially when watching in a competitive format. Like, seriously guys?
Could you keep it down? I'm trying to be boring.
But it struggles with gameplay variety, and a lot of players still just treat it like TDM. I prefer long maps with more point variety, and I prefer the set attack and defense teams instead of the weird flip-flop, which does do a good job in TF2 Koth's instance of pacing the game and giving room for both teams to attack and defend, but I prefer payload, sue me. It's just hit that perfect spot to me. Not to say it is perfect, no game mode ever will be, but shit if payload doesn't come close. With all that being said though, CP Steel is my favorite map in TF2, and probably just my favorite map, period. I can play it for hours on end, which is something I can't even say about the best of payload maps. But CP Steel is such a special exception, and it's probably a video for another time, so we'll leave it at that. Alright, thanks for watching. If you have anything to add, do so in the comments. I know this particular video will have a lot of disagreements, so just remember we're talking about video game modes here. And this isn't a big stinky argument, it's just a discussion. Anyway, remember to like, comment, subscribe, brush your teeth, wash your hands, and all that shit. Alright, goodbye. Payload